All right, what's going on? Okay, we're here for whatever it's worth, and we'll make the most of it as we can. I'll probably have to zoom this out a little bit. All right, let's get to it. Um, I need to mute my own headset. Hold, please. Okay, there we go. All right, that way I don't hear myself. All right, what's going on? Okay. Please, for example, a balance sheet question. Yeah, I will. 100%. Let's do that right now. So if we do AP macro, no, I don't want that. AP classroom. There we go. Okay, so I'm already thinking of one in my head that I'm certain to include. So if you happen to tune in tonight, congratulations. You're going to see one of tomorrow's questions, okay? And the reason why I know I'm doing it, yeah, password, thank you. The reason why I know I want to do it is because it's shown up several times. And as a multiple choice question, it gives us the opportunity to look at actually 3 balance sheets, not one. Do I need to save this? No, I don't. Okay. So a balance sheet question could also show up on the part 2. So I'll show you an example of both of those. Okay, we'll do both. Because they can show up in a part 1, they can show up in a part 2. You also go over and move MS or MD. Or we're not doing MD shifting. We're not doing MD shifting on tomorrow's quiz. That's a Monday problem onward. MS, yeah, sure, of course I'll go with that. What is the monetary base and will it be on the quiz? Yes and yes is the answer to that. Hold, please. That's just a definition question. That's not hard at all. I'll do that one in a moment. All right, so let's start with the banking. Keep posting questions. I'm glancing over and having a look at my chat. Hopefully my audio is good. I think it is. I was hearing myself before. All right, so if I look at balance sheet and I go to, what do you mean? Oh, because I didn't select the topic, right? Okay. And I go multiple. I have not built it yet. This is the one right here. Exactly what I was thinking of. Okay. So let's zoom it in and have us a giggle, all right? So the question here, you got 3 balance sheets. And they say based on the balance sheets above for 3 different banks, Which of the following is true if reserve requirement is 10%? Okay, so, don't mind me, I'm still clearing up the bad throat thing. Hopefully the tea will hold out. I'm drinking Darjeeling, by the way. Real, legit Indian Darjeeling. The same soil used to hook a nation on opium. Here we go. Okay. So, a balance sheet. Left-hand side assets. Right-hand side liabilities. You have, on the asset side, typically one of two things in terms of reserves. It's either going to say reserves, as these all do. This is actual reserves or overall reserves, or just reserves. Meaning, I don't know by looking at any of these balance sheets whether that, let's just say Bank A, whether that Bank A's 1,000 in actual reserves is required or excess. I do not know. Now, I can determine it, but I'm not told it, okay? So that's number one. Also on the asset side, typically are loans, as you see here. Occasionally, and I'll try to find an example of this, occasionally you'll see treasury bonds on there as well. Occasionally, even less occasionally, you'll see like infrastructure or assets the bank might own, physical assets, something like that. On the liability side, there's typically only ever two things, usually only ever one. The first is the demand deposits, which are the monies that people put into the bank. These are liabilities. And then occasionally, as I said, there'll be owner's equity, particularly if there is some asset like infrastructure or a treasury bonds or something like that on the asset side. Typically, there is some ownership of that bond. You know, a kind of a real world scenario, something like Bank A buys, I don't know, a $10 million government bond and then sells 10 shares at $1 million a piece to various different peoples out there. Those 10 people are a liability for the bank because they have owner's equity in the bank's asset. You know, they're owed a debt, basically. Okay, so which of the following is true if required reserves 10%? So we're just going to do like a proof. We'll do A through E, prove yes, no, each one, okay? Bank A has no excess reserves. Is this correct? Well, if required reserve is 10%, we can determine how many required reserves the bank is actually, how many excess and required reserves the bank is actually holding. Because in a limited reserves framework, which this is assuming a limited reserves framework, we're assuming a bank will never keep in its vaults more than the government requires it to, meaning there will never be a required reserve above the minimum. So if the minimum is 10%, there'll only ever be 10%. So 10% of what? Well, it's 10% of the demand deposit, right? So if your demand deposit is, if your demand deposit is 5,000, can I highlight? I can highlight. I've never used this tool. I still apparently don't know how to use this tool. Okay. More? No more. Not working. All right. Anyway, so if demand deposits is $5,000, 10% of those deposits, and only those deposits. If there are other liabilities on the liability column, they're not relevant. Only the deposits are relevant. So 10% of $5,000 is $500, right? So since the Bank A has more than $500 in actual reserves, it therefore has an amount of excess reserves. In this case, we can determine that they have exactly $500 in actual reserves and exactly $500 in excess. Actually $500 in required reserves and exactly $500 in excess reserves. So once again, because it's 10% of the 5,000, that means the actual reserve number is $500 of required and $500 of excess, proving that Bank A does indeed have excess reserves. Thus, this cannot be the right answer. B. Bank B has no excess reserves. We'll apply the same logic. 10% of $600 is $60. Do they have more than $60 in reserves? Yes, they do. That means they have $40 in excess reserves. So they, like Bank A, do have excess reserves. Choice B cannot be correct. Bank B can increase its loans by $500. No, Bank B doesn't even have $500 to give out right now. Bank B has $100. That's what it's got. It's already extended $500 in loans, and it has $600 in deposits, of which it has loaned out $500, but it only has $100 in cash. Even if it was allowed to legally lend every penny of that out, it could not lend out $500. It's only got $100. So there's just no way at all. That just simply can't be. So C also incorrect. Bank B can increase its loans by $40. Well, that is true, because we just determined that because it's 10% of 600, there is $60 in required reserves. That means there's $40 in excess reserves. Those excess reserves can be loaned. FYI, the amount a bank can increase its loans by is equal to however much in excess reserves it owns. Simple as that. Sorry. For the sake of completeness, why is E wrong? Bank C has excess reserves. Well, no, it doesn't. 10% required reserve, $100 deposit means that these $10 in reserves are all required reserves. Therefore, they do not have any excess reserve. Okay? So that's a multiple choice balance sheet style question that happens to have 3 balance sheets for us to work with. Now, if I was going to look for a FRQ on balance sheets, and they certainly exist, Bank of Uchena. I'm going to look for one that has, okay, this has owner's equity, so we can look at this just for the sake of looking at it. Like I thought it'd be, here we go. What year was this? I feel like this was recent. All right, this was a practice exam. So I've seen this before. It's a practice exam, which means it's not appeared on a real AP exam, but certainly something like it clearly could. So Bank of Uchena has the following balance sheet. We've got liabilities and equity. So they have $100,000 in demand deposits. They have owner's equity, net worth, whatever, of $2,000. Notice that that is exactly equivalent to the property they own. So the property could be anything. It could be buildings. It could be copy machines, any asset whatsoever, company car, company computers, it doesn't matter. It's $2,000 in property owned by this group. Now, why would the question even include that? What would be the reason from a sort of a question standpoint of even including that? It's very straightforward, very simple. The reason they do that is to try to confuse you into thinking that required reserves are based on the total liability side. In other words, the fool takes the $100,000 of demand deposits, adds the $2,000 of owner's equity, and goes, oh, it's 10% or whatever the number would be. In this case, it's 20%. It's 20% of $102,000. No, it is not. Required reserves are only ever based upon the demand deposits, right? It's not a regulation on all of banking. It's a regulation put in place to ensure the safety and health of the monetary system. So it's there to ensure the people who put their money in banks have a guarantee of getting it back. That's its purpose. So it's got nothing to do with a bank's private business. If a bank wants to buy copy machines, they have to keep 10% of the copy machines in value in the vault. That's crazy town. So it's not a thing. So keep that in mind. So looking at the part 2. I'm sure the unasked question would be, is there going to be a part 2 like this with no graphing whatsoever of the money market? Yeah, totally possible, sure. The multiple choice is going to cover all this, right? So if anyone's looking for sort of like a hit list of what to do, it's the M's, calculating them and all that. It's fiscal policy. Sorry, that's a lie. It's monetary policy, which are the 3 tools of change of required reserve, discount rate, and federal funds rate through the open market operations. It's the role of the Fed. I'm not going to get too much in the weeds about FOMC and all that stuff. I'm only going to do it the AP tests. And they typically don't test that because that's specific to the U.S. Fed. But roles and powers of central banks as a monetary agency that can regulate the money supply, there may be a question that slips in, but I'm going to call it on I doubt it. Again, I haven't made any quizzes yet. I don't like to make them until the last minute. Then following that, you've got the money market, which has to reflect these changes. So increasing money supply or increasing money demand. Karen asked that we look at that. I promise we will. Give me a moment. We will not be dealing with MD shifts in this quiz. I will not have questions where that is a thing. So don't worry about that. Balance sheets in banking absolutely are a thing that is on this quiz, as you could definitely see here. So, and then the money velocity piece. And then stuff like, okay, if I increase money supply and has an effect on interest rates, what effect does it have on investment demand? What effect does it have on AD and unemployment and price levels and etc. So that's all valid. Is it a sort of a meaty topic? Yeah, it's real super dense, man. You know, it's real super dense. So you got to really beware of that. Like, this is hard. This tea is so goddamn good. Damn. Worth the money. Okay. You got a reserve requirement of 20% according to this question. So my eyes are over here because that's my big widescreen monitor. This is just where the camera is, so don't, I'm not having a stroke on you. So calculate the dollar value of the reserves the Bank of Uchenna is required to hold. Okay, so that's easy. 20% of 100 grand, which means their reserve number of 30,000 is actually 20,000 required, 10,000 excess. Which I haven't read ahead and seen the question. I mean, I'm sure I looked at it in years past, but I can already tell you right now, if they ask how much in loans can they make in addition to what they've already made, the answer is only $10,000. Why? Because they have a reserve of 20,000 required, and the remainder is the excess. You can only ever loan your excess. Why am I able to predict that a question like that would be likely to appear? Only because I've done this for 22 freaking years, and that's what they do. They give you a percentage, and they go, okay, how much is the required reserve? How much is the excess reserve? Okay, based on that, how much can they loan? Like, it's predictable, man. It's like tying a shoelace. So I don't know if that's one of the questions that are coming, but I mean, if I had to bet money, I'd probably bet a reasonable amount. B, given the current reserves, calculate the maximum value of additional. There you go. So the answer is $10,000. Like I said, it's whatever's left of the excess reserve. Can we also review when you move the equilibrium of the investment demand curve? Yeah, we can do that. I'll draw that out for you. Absolutely. If you're looking for practice on that, and I'll get back to that in a minute, the Ultimate Review Packet had really good practice on that. I would go back and relook at that. I can't open it here because, frankly, I don't know my password, and it's on my work computer, not my home computer. All right. Assume that Elika raises 5,000. All right, so let's pay attention to this because these are trick questions. When they do stuff like this, there's always a trick, so let's be careful. Assume that Elika raises 5,000 in cash from a yard sale, okay, and deposits the cash in his checking account at the Bank of Uchenna. All right, so, whatever. Bobby's got $5,000 in cash that he found, stole, begged, borrowed, sold hard drugs, whatever he did. He's got $5,000, he sticks it in the bank. Okay. He puts it in his checking account. That doesn't really matter. It used to matter. It doesn't really matter now. By how much money does the money supply immediately change as a result of the deposit? The answer is $0. Because M1 is cash, checking, and savings. So, because they put the money in the checking account, there is no change. If they put the money in a savings account, there is still no change. For there to be a change in the money supply, an immediate change, there's going to be a long-term change. This will be subject to the money multiplier that will occur. And there probably will be a question about that. But there will be a long-term change. And we'll come back to that in a second. If they don't ask about it, I'll bring it back up. But the immediate change, Bob takes his money, whacks it in the bank. How much has M1 changed? 0. Now, if he had put it in a certificate of deposit, if he had bought government bonds, if he had done something like that, bought a savings bond, something that would remove it from the M1 currency demand deposit, non-checkable deposit category, then and only then could we say with some certainty, all right, money supply has decreased by 5,000. This guy took it right out of the bank account, right out of the money supply. But that has not happened here. Now, that is not to be confused with the money multiplier. There will still be a multiplicative effect. $5,000 that was not in the banking system, that could not be loaned, could not be used, and could not be borrowed, is different than $5,000 sitting in a cookie jar, right? So that's a very important thing. So as an example, right here, money box, cash money in here, right? So here, here's the 20. This 20 in this box, along with all the other money in this box that happens to be here, this money cannot multiply. It's sitting here. It can't multiply. Under no circumstance can that money be lent out. I mean, yeah, I could personally lend it out, but I'm not a banking institution. Right? Let's keep that in mind. So it can't be lent out. It can't be deposited, spent somewhere, borrowed somewhere. I mean, right now, effectively, this is a very hardcore, heavy-duty, over-engineered wallet. It's not savings. If you put it into a bank, it now is subject to the multiplier effect. That's why it's important that there is a multiplier effect. It just has no immediate change in the money supply. If I have cash sitting in this box here, or I got change sitting on the floor of my car out there, or I've got the equivalent money shoved into a checking account, in that moment, no change to M1. So C is no change at all. D, calculate the maximum change in demand deposits in the banking system as a whole resulting from the deposit. Okay, so this is a little complicated. Check me out. How do we do this? Let's get some numbers down. It was $5,000 that went in. This, let's call it, is cash. Kid puts the $5,000 into a checking account. This means the bank's liability goes up by $5,000, right? Because the demand deposits, if it was a banking T account, right? So here, let me put on my where is the thing? Yeah, but I don't want that. I want like the ability. Where is it in this thing? The ability to just like draw. Mode. No. What's this? No. I saw it before. I used it before. Is it this? I guess we're using this. All right. So if this is a... Oh, come on, really? Where is just like a free draw tool? Why is this so complicated? Scribble. All right. So if this is... Oh, my God. If this is just a T account, that is the worst T account God ever created. And here's your assets, and here's your liabilities. That $5,000 just got added to the liability side of things, right? It does. So however much money that bank had previously, it now goes up by $5,000. That matters. I'll explain why. It matters. So, okay, hello drawing. That didn't help at all. So, since that's over there, technically speaking, that is subject to the required reserve ratio of 20% in this case, because that was what the question said. So keep that keep that fact in mind for later on. Now we need a money multiplier. The money multiplier is 1 over the required reserve. In this case, the required reserve is 20%. So 1 over 0.20 means you have, thank you very much for telling me the answer, you have 5. This 5 is the multiplier, meaning some amount of M times 5 will equal the total, can I delta? I can't delta. Do I have a triangle? No. Total amount of change in the money supply. That's what it is. Now, change in the money supply. Change. That's important. We have to ask for, no. Let me rephrase that. Total, how do I phrase this? Equals the total created money. I guess that's what I mean. And I'll explain why I changed that in a moment. Let's go back to the question. So they ask you to calculate the maximum change in demand deposits. Change. So here's the trick. Because the initial deposit was already cash and it went into a checking account, it is subject to required reserve. What does that mean for the answer? It means the $5,000 has to be reduced by the required reserve before you multiply it. Okay? So before you multiply it by 5, we got to take the required reserve out. They're not allowed to loan that. Right? So 20%. 20% of 5,000, right? 10% is 500, so $1,000. So that means this is really only $4,000 times 5, which means you get a total change of 20,000. That would be your answer. Now, the instinct is to do 5 times 5 for $25,000. That is incorrect. In this case, it's 4 times 5 because there is a 20% required reserve that must come out of that money before it can start to be multiplied. In other words, as soon as Bob puts that in the bank, 20% has to come out before the bank can do all its loaning and start the process of deposit expansion. So that's what happens. You have to take that number out. Now, let me give you scenario B. Scenario B is tricky and it does occur. Scenario B. You have $5,000 in government treasury bonds, still owned by Bobby. Bobby sells his bonds. No, let me rephrase that. $5,000 in government bonds. Let me not bring Bobby into this. $5,000 in government treasury bonds owned by the Bank of Uchenna. In other words, we went back to the bank, and they would have here $5,000 in assets. That would be treasury bonds. Imagine that for a moment. This occurs. These questions exist. $5,000 in treasury bonds as assets owned by the bank. Forget Bobby. Bobby never made it. Bobby's doing cocaine. Now, when this happens, notice the difference. $5,000 in bonds owned by the bank. Let's say that the bank sells their bonds, sells them off. This $5,000 in bonds now becomes $5,000 in cash. Why does this matter? And why did I take Bobby out of the equation? Because this cash is not a deposit. This is the bank selling its property. It's no different than if it's sold off like a building it owned or some old furniture or whatever the hell. It's the bank's money. It's not a deposit. That means it's not subject to required reserve. And since it was not M1 beforehand, this is totally new money. So if the bank takes this $5,000 in cash and they want to do the money multiplier thing again, and they want to find out how much money is going to get created from this, in this circumstance, it's $5,000, not $4,000, times 5. And you do get an answer of $25,000. Why is that? Well, again, if Bobby had taken his money, which is why I take Bobby out of this altogether, because if Bobby owned a bond and Bobby sold the bond and Bobby took his cash and stuck it in the bank, then we're back over here in scenario A because Bobby's a depositor and that's respected or that's required reserve territory. Whereas if it's the bank selling property, which a bond's a property, and it's not a deposit, it's not subject to required reserves. Therefore, they can loan the whole mess and it speeds up that money multiplier. So that's the idea. So please note that difference. All right, if I recall and I remember, we're already at this for a half hour. If I recall and remember, I'll try to find a part 2 question that has that in it. They definitely exist. It might take a little while because I'm got to go through like 20 years of questions. But it 100% definitely exists, okay? So keep that in mind. Let's go back and finish the question. If the Bank of Uchen is not meeting its required reserve, what action can it take to meet the required reserve while calling in loans or selling property? Well, borrow. Borrow. The answer is borrow from other banks, borrow from the Fed. Those are your options. That's it. Those are the only possible answers. They got to meet their required reserve. Okay, in the interest of giving it a shot, let's see if I can skim through some of these questions and find one that's got that circumstance of the selling of the bonds. Here we go. Right here. When is this from? See that? That's an AP exam question. That means this has been on a test. You should pay attention to this. Let's do this one. Canary Bank is a commercial bank in Econ land with the following balance sheet. The banking system in Econ land has limited reserves. Okay, this looks like a very new question. So you got reserves of 10, demand deposits of, I'm going to zoom out so we can see the full numbers. Wow. You could tell government, you could tell a non-for-profit made this, huh? Jesus God. You can't even get the numbers on screen. That's not a me problem. That's a them problem. Do I need to... yeah, you can't even slide this window. Like, who makes this crap? All right. That's incredible. Is there a way for me to... try this. No, that made it worse. Yep, that made it worse. What if I F11 it? Nope. No bueno. Alright. We're going to have to just fake the funk on this. Unless there's something I'm doing very seriously stupid. I don't think I am. Oh, God. You have to scroll over. What a dumb system. Alright. We'll scroll over. These guys really need to get their act together. If this is the way the AP exam is, that's actually a real problem. Alright, anyway. So we have assets of $10,000. We've got demand deposits of $200,000. I'm going to try and get all the numbers on screen. That's the best I can do for now. We have government bonds of $300,000, owner's equity of $110,000. Now, what's the owner's equity of $110,000? Why isn't it equal to the bond? Because that just means the bank hasn't sold all the asset. That's all it means. It just means the banks hasn't sold it all. That's all it means. The bank has not sold off all their shares of government bonds. You know, they've sold off, in this case, it's like, you know, let's call it 35% or something like that, whatever the number would be. Okay, to the questions. Calculate the required reserve. Canary Bank holds no excess reserves. Okay, that's simple. So if Canary Bank is not holding any excess reserves, that means they're telling you flat out that these reserves are all required. So if they only are required to hold $10,000 of a $200,000 demand deposit, that's 5%. Use your calculator if you need to. That's 5%. So that's your required reserve here. Now, the Central Bank of Econ land buys $50,000 of government bonds from Canary Bank. Okay? They certainly have that. They got $300,000 worth. What is the dollar value of the change in the monetary base? Explain using numbers. Well, KDS, you asked about monetary base. Monetary base has come to find you. Here we go. Monetary base definition. There you go. There it is. I like Investopedia. The monetary base, the total amount of a currency in circulation or held in reserve. So in other words, it's all the cash in the economy plus all the money in bank reserves. That is what it is, okay? So required reserves or excess reserves, that's your monetary base. So right here, physical paper and coin currency, that's currency, right? Plus bank reserves that are required reserves. Okay, simple as that. Now, it's all bank reserves, really, because excess reserves are themselves somewhere in the cash system, okay? So, that's basically it. So, any reserve, excess or required, that's it. There you go. All right, that's your monetary base definition. Now, do you need to know it? Well, I think I'm answering that question by simply... What? No, go away. By simply showing that there's a question that has it in there. This tea is so damn good. Explain using numbers. All right, let's explain using numbers. So the question is, what is the dollar value change in the monetary base? Okay. So, in fact, rather than me type it, I could probably just show the official answer, right? Yeah, sure. Or is it right there? No. Okay. So they bought $50,000 in bonds. That means the answer is going to be the monetary base goes up by $50,000. Why? Because it's in reserves. It becomes excess reserves for the bank. It's that simple. So any bond purchase, remember, what is a bond purchase? The Fed buys bonds from the bank. I like how they say explain using numbers and they use mostly words. Okay, that's typical. So the Fed buys bonds. By buying bonds, you make the money supply bigger because you take the bond away from the bank and you exchange them with cash. They get your cash and you, the central bank, you keep the bond. So if I keep the $50,000 bond and I give you $50,000 cash, what happens to it? Well, in the immediate moment, it just goes into your excess reserves. That's all it is. It's just extra cash money the bank has on hand, which makes it part of the monetary base. So, a score of 1. The response states the monetary base will increase by $50,000. I guess that's the number they want. They wanted the actual number. Yeah, it seemed pretty obvious to me. They asked for a dollar value change, so I don't know what else that could mean. And explains... Okay, they explained that the central bank bond purchase increases reserves from 50,000, and the monetary base is the sum of reserves and currency in circulation. So I guess the answer they want is to require you to explain why that 50,000 is part of the monetary base. That is not a very good question for ensuring a student would explain that. But this was on an AP exam, so we gotta take it for what it is, It's gospel that this is the way it goes. So anyway, that's how you do that question. Let's go back to the questions themselves. All right, based on your answer to part A, calculate the maximum change in the money supply. Now, again, sparing my need to go typing numbers. I'm going to show you the answer. But what did we just say? This is not subject to required reserve. So if this 50,000 hits the bank, they can lend the whole bastard. What we do need, though, is we need a money multiplier. So the money multiplier in this case... The money multiplier in this case is going to be 1 over RR as before, but in this case, the RR is a 5% required reserve. Do be careful. This is not 5%. That is 50%. That is 5%, right? So make sure you do that. And that makes a multiplier of 20. If you don't believe me, do the calculator. So, your multiplier is 20. So in this case, it's going to be $50,000 times a multiplier of 20 is going to equal 50 times 20. So 50 times 2 is 100 times, what is that? A million? Do I have that right? In my head math? Let's find out. Oh, God. 1 million. There it goes. Okay. So $1 million is your maximum change in money supply. Why is it not 800,000? Well, is that what the answer would be? Yeah. Why is that 800,000? In other words, why didn't I take the 50,000, remove the required... Well, I guess it wouldn't be 50,000 in the first place. Excuse me. Let me not say that. Why didn't I take the 50,000, remove the 5% required reserve, and then multiply it. Why didn't I do that? I did that in the last question. Why didn't I do that here? The last question was Bob bringing cash to a bank. That is different. That has to go through the demand deposit required reserve. This does not. This is cash money property the bank owns because it sold an asset. That is very different. It's like collecting fees from a credit card or interest on a loan. These are not money subject to required reserve. Thus, they fully multiply. There is no need to reduce them in the sort of the outset. So in this case, the whole thing becomes a multiplied number. You would not remove any amount based upon the fact that there's a required reserve. Please pay attention to this distinction. This is one of them things they test. And this is the only way they can do it. There's really no other way. There's really no other way for them to do this particular sneak move. Because the only asset that a bank could really have that it could sell in any way that makes some kind of sense in a question like this would be treasury bonds. That's really it. I mean, could they arrange some question where the bank owns, I don't know, 5 buildings and they're worth $1 billion and the bank sold the buildings? I've never seen anything like that. And it also means that you really, what else are you testing at that point? Remember, these questions have to kind of flow, right? And you'll see that here. So given your change in C, so if you got it wrong, base it on your change. Calculate the change in nominal GDP if velocity of money is 2. Show your work. Okay, so here we go. So we said the change in money supply was $1 million, right? Because remember, it's M times V equals P times Y, right? So if the change in M, or M be increased by $1 million, and we're trying to find out what velocity is. No, we know velocity is 2. So times 2 equals, and what do they want us to solve for? Calculate the change in nominal GDP. Oh, well, we have that number. It's 1 million times 2. So GDP goes up 2 million. Nominal GDP is this side of the thing, right? The whole thing is nominal GDP. So there you go. That's your answer. It's mathematically sound, right? Simple as that. Now, I don't know if price went up a bit, if real GDP went up a bit, if they both went up a bit, one went up, one went down. I have no idea. All I know is mathematically, if I got 2 million on the left-hand side of the equation sign, I got to have 2 million on the right-hand side of the equation sign. Full stop, that's it. Right? Again, again, it's like those logic proofs from back in the day. That's kind of what it's like. Oh, God, this tea's so good. Tea is so good. Making really high quality tea in a French press, I highly, highly recommend. Quite a good idea. You get a very clean cup of tea with a very nice taste. It's God's milk right there. All right. Let's finish the question. Assume the economy of Econ land is initially at full employment. All right. So once again, at full employment would mean that Y is locked in. It can't move, right? You've hit that vertical on your AS curve, on that 3-stage AS curve. You're in that vertical range, the classical range. That GDP is locked in. You're on the production possibility frontier. You're on the line. In the long run, you can't go beyond that. Like, that's what the long run means. Remember, in the short run, you could skip out there a little bit, but it always comes back, right? The economy always self-adjusts. So in the long run, you cannot actually violate that. That's one of the reasons, by the way, I really do like the 3-stage AS curve. I've always preferred it. I think it's actually very, very elegant, and I don't like the fact that economists got rid of it. But I feel like this is actually a very, very powerful way of teaching AS without the need to have a separate LRAS. You can tell what's going on in the economy this way. I've always been quite a fan of this particular way of showing it, but it's not what the AP does traditionally. They do the one I've shown you. But if we look over here at this, for example, AD3 would represent a situation where you're at the long run because you've hit the classical range. So GDP you can shift AD to the right to the moon if you want to. You cannot raise GDP because there's no more supply. Remember what Friedman said. What is inflation actually? Here's CPI, right? That's the measure of inflation. Over here, price level, which could be CPI. That means when you hit that point, you have too much money chasing too few goods. That is what it is. So you need to cut back the money so that way the money isn't continuing to chase goods that don't exist. That's inflation, right? So it causes inflation anyway. So back to this. Assume the economy is initially at full employment based solely on the change in money supply in Part C, which we said was a $1 million increase to money supply. Will real output increase, decrease, or stay the same in the long run? Well, that's a trick question. Real output's going to stay the same. Why? Too much money chasing too few goods. Check it out. All right, let's go look at the key. I'm going to be very confident that there's going to be no change. Change in nominal. Was it nominal? I just said. Hold on. Let me read it. No, real output. What does this got to do with nominal? Oh, I'm on D. I need to be on E. Excuse me. E. The response states that real output will stay the same in the long run and explains that when the economy is at full employment, changes in the money supply have no effect on real output. Now, prices will go the hell up. They absolutely will. But real GDP cannot change. No, it cannot. Because, again, too much money chasing too few goods. You've hit the cap on what's available to be bought. So all you're doing now with that extra money is trying to price people out of what's available, right? It's like having an auction and every product is $3 and there's 10 products to be sold and all the bids are at $3 to start and I give everybody $300. Well, some of you are going to spend your money in insane ways only because you have so much of it. You might as well use it to acquire something, right? And so that will spike the price. It doesn't mean those goods are worth that. They might be worth $3, but if I give you $300 and there's only 10 items to buy, then you're going to spend the $300 on 10 items. Whereas if I had 10,000 items to buy, the items cost would be relatively cheap because there's so much available. I can be quite choosy as a buyer as to what I'm willing to spend every individual dollar on. And that's the difference. So when you're in that range of classical range, that is when you simply cannot make the economy produce more stuff by hurling more money at it. That's when you get nothing but naked inflation. That unanticipated spike of inflation that we saw in the 70s, and frankly, we saw, 36 to 48 months ago. So that's what you kind of get out of that. All right, so those are two good complex questions. All right, Kate, I feel like we answered your what is the monetary base, and we'll be on the quiz question. If you feel like I didn't, feel free to correct me. Karen, can we review? All right, yes, we can. Okay. How do I find this? I'm going to find it. Okay. 3-step money supply, no, money market, investment demand, ADAS. I don't know. I'm gonna let my man. By the way, never give up on the cokehead. He always has an answer for you. Okay. We'll put him in the. We're not gonna watch him. We'll put him in the. Chill out, bro. Chill out, bro. Take a bump. Let me just see if he does it, because if he does it, I'll just use his. No, he does not. Not in this. You could definitely find a video on it. Go to the Ultimate Review Packet and use it. He definitely has good videos on this. He has the Ultimate Review Packet had a very nice selection of stuff on this. All right. Oh, I can click on my own live. I'm so lame. The Ultimate Review Packet definitely has like there's 2 questions with 3 graphs side by side. You want to do that. That's a good practice for this. But that's okay. I'll find it. I'll find an image somebody drew on it. Yeah, these are them. This is legit. We'll use this one right here. I just want to see if there's anything that looks more legit. That one's pretty good, though. Yeah, it's fine. All right. So. All right, let's go to homeworkstudy.com, boyos. All right, so go there. What's going on? Take me home. Oh, great. Oh, really? You think I'm going to pay you, huh? Well, my friend, you would be quite wrong. Ta-da! Stolen. All right. So what do we have here? We have the money market, investment demand, ADAS. Don't get freaked out by ADAS having curves. That is, as they're having a curved slope. That is how it really looks in real life. We've discussed that. Okay. Just focus on the movements. So we've got a money supply decreases. Now, the question Karen actually asked was, can we also review when you move the equilibrium of the investment demand graph and the same reflection ADS? Yes, we can. So you'll notice that investment demand and the money market are actually linked. They both have nominal interest rates. They should be nominal interest rate. Don't be lazy. I won't allow it. All right, these should be marked with R's. This is some dingo on homeworkstudy.com doing the best they can. So, if there is a policy, because we're not doing money demand shifts, not yet. If there is a policy that MS shifts to the left, what would cause that? You could raise your required reserve ratio. You could raise the discount rate. You could sell bonds. Any of those, it would result in this. So MS shifts to the left. This reduces the amount of money in the economy. Look what happens. The reduction in the amount of money from Q to Q1 over here raises interest rates from, let's call it R to R1. Like, that's what it actually does. When it does that, its effect on all interest rates is, what's the word you would call it? It cascades, right? So one leads to the other, leads to the other, leads to the other. They're all built on, remember how we talked about, you have that federal funds rate at the bottom, and then they tack on the risk, not the risk, the inflationary expectation, and that together is your prime rate, and then they tack your risk factors of loan and lender on top of that, and that creates your nominal interest rate you actually pay. So anytime you mess around with those bottom layers of the cake, the whole cake shifts. So over here, because we went from this original amount of investment due to being at that particular interest rate, and interest rate has now risen, there will be less investment spending. Investment spending has declined. Investment spending is a part of AD. Remember, AD is just a value of GDP for a given price level. That is all AD is. So if I say price level is 106 CPI, at that given price level, there is an amount of spending the economy will do. That is AD. That is the amount of GDP you get. That's why it's I'm pointing at a screen, you can't see. That's why it's a quantity of GDP, real GDP. So, if I reduce investment spending, the C plus I plus G plus NX equation that makes up GDP, well, I is the middle one. If I reduce the I, there is less of the whole bucket. The whole thing declines. Why does it happen? Because investment and consumption are interest sensitive. They're the private sector spending that you do and businesses do. And if I have to make a decision to borrow money, I absolutely care how much it's going to cost me in the future to pay that loan back. A 5% borrow is a much nicer arrangement than a 25% borrow. A 1% borrow is a much nicer arrangement than a 5% borrow. You lower interest rates, I'm more likely to borrow, and I'm more likely to borrow larger sums. So that's the way that goes. Now, the government doesn't care. The government is not interest sensitive. So you would not see its effect on government graphs because government don't care. Why doesn't the government care? Because debtclock.com, that's why the government don't care. Because every single moment of every single day we borrow. They've added a Doge clock. That's pretty funny. I have no idea what that is. I didn't even look at that yet. But there is a number up here somewhere that is future debt. I'm not going to spend time looking for it right now. But there is a number on here they have somewhere that is future debt owed on the current debt. In other words, here it is. No, it's future U.S. Treasury dollars. Anyway, it's the amount of money we owe on the interest rate. So you can even find right here that there is in the budget what percent we pay on nothing but interest. Right here, interest on the debt. So right now, as this number rises every single day, what we're basically saying is that we raise as we borrow on a day-to-day basis, and the government literally borrows to operate. Like the government cannot operate on a single day if it doesn't actually borrow. So there is constant debt that goes on, and that debt comes with an interest rate. The government doesn't care what it has to borrow at because nobody in government's paying it back, right? They're passing it on to the taxpayer and to future generations. You don't get to do that. Like if you borrow, you're on the hook for it, man. And like that's it. Like there's no other way. The government has the power of the purse. They can tax everybody. So the government has an unlimited purse string. And that's the big difference. So back to this. So sensitive components to interest sensitive components of GDP are C and I. If interest rates fall because of an increase in money supply, let's reverse all this. So if money supply increased and interest rates fell, I'd expect to see AD shift to the right. If money supply decreases and interest rates rise, I'd expect investment and consumption to fall, and that would cause AD to shift to the left. That's the way you explain it, by the way. You explain it by simply talking us through this process. So my recommendation would be on your scrap paper, I'll give everybody scrap paper tomorrow, if you have to do a question that says explain how the Fed's policy in Part A will affect prices and unemployment in Part D, right? What you should do is draw this. Now, this gets you no credit. They ask you to explain. You can't explain by going, look at my pretty pictures. But you should explain it and then talk us through it. Just go step to step. Because of the decrease in money supply caused by the sale of bonds in the money market, this results in higher interest rates, which reduces investment demand. And as a result of that, AD would shift to the left, reducing price levels, reducing real GDP, and increasing unemployment. And Bob's your uncle. That's how you do it. All right. Other questions. Now, I know we're on like a 10-second-ish delay, so I'll wait. Are there other questions about anything? I feel like I whirlwind that pretty good. And for what was roughly 50 minutes of work, I feel like you got what you paid for, which was $0. So it was worth the price of admission. I do recommend this tea. You should buy it. Where the hell did I get it? What's it called? Vadim? Vadim? Something like that. Hang on, please. Vadim tea. I think it's Vadim tea. Yeah, this stuff. These guys are legit. So not only are they legit, but like if you buy their Darjeeling was from Darjeeling. It actually had the official Darjeeling label in there. So highly recommend. At least that stuff. Product type. What do you mean, man? Black tea. Yeah, all right. So I can't promise you that. So the one I got was the first flush, and it had, if you open it up, it's got a booklet in there, and in the booklet it had the seal of Darjeeling tea on it. So I don't see it here. I don't know why they don't show it off here, but it was in the booklet for sure. Anyway, it's good tea. I don't know what that's got to do to econ, but there's your free advertisement. Is there anything specific you recommend looking at for tomorrow? Well, you can replay this video, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I do. I said it. I think you should really look at the Ultimate Review Packet and take a look at the stuff in there, especially this 3-stage curve thing. Because whether or not this is in the part 2 you grab, it's going to be there on the multiple choice or something. I mean, the odds are good there'll be overlap between the part 2s and multiple choice. If you're asking me to kind of give some insight, because again, I haven't built it, my instinct is that I'll have about 3 different versions of the part 2. One will be a balance sheet or balance sheet heavy. I don't know which balance sheet. I have no idea. But there will be one. There'll be one that's kind of... And they're all going to be short. I don't want to put a long because a long is really meant to take a half hour. So they're all going to be short FRQs. So the balance sheet one is a short one. That's fair enough. If I was going to do one that's like graph the money market, if I graph the money market, say what happens to this, and probably explain how it changes AD. That's basically what you could do with that. Maybe throw velocity in as a curveball. Probably like maybe 2.5 versions, not 3 versions. Like there might be a combo in there somewhere, a little bit of a sort of a rope-a-dope of one and the other. I haven't really decided. The multiple choice will run the gamut. I'm going to make sure that it's kind of well balanced. So if I have, let's say, 15 multiple choice, just to make up a number, there'll be 5 that are straight up like policy on the money market, move the money market, stuff happens. There'll be 5 that are like the M's and banking and T accounts, etc. And somewhere like 2 on velocity. That'd be about what I would expect. I know it doesn't add up to 15, but give or take. Yeah, it's the best I can do. About 15. The way I view it is full period quiz, about 15 minutes on the part 1, meaning multiple choice, and about 15 minutes on the part 2. Ellie, if you mean, are we only shifting MS and we're not shifting, is your question really, are we going to have to shift MD tomorrow? Please confirm for me. I know we're on a delay. But do you mean, are we not shifting MD? Because there are lots of graphical things that might happen tomorrow. And I don't want to give the impression, and I really tried not to, that the only part 2 you have to do is to shift MS. I don't want to give that impression. Now, MD will not shift as a correct choice on anything that you see tomorrow. Okay, great. It will not shift. Ellie just said yes. It will not shift on anything that's correct tomorrow. Also, no, I will not be asking you to draw an investment demand curve nor draw an AD curve like you see here. You are never asked to draw these. That's not a thing I've ever seen. Explain them? Abso-freaking-lutely. Draw them? Doesn't exist in anything I've ever done. So take that for what it is, but that's the reality. All right. Speak now or hold your peace. With the how many people got left? 14 people. My God, we're breaking records. Like and subscribe, people. Oh man, I should get a kickback. I should get a sponsorship from that tea company. That tea is so good. I'm gonna make another pot. What is an example of a question regarding the M's? Good question. Okay, let's go back to the AP classroom. Let's clear the filters. Go to Unit 4. The really truly slick among you, the ones who are like real criminals, you'd find somebody who teaches AP macro and has access to this and pay them money for access to the question bank. Okay. Boom, 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 and boom. Definition, measurement, and functions of money. Question type, MCQ. There you go. These are all example questions. So, the narrowest definition of M1 includes what? Cash withdrawal. If Fred Jones takes $1,000 in cash from his savings account, what happens to M1 and M2? Be careful about a question like this. This is a trick question. This is a nasty question, actually. Let's do this one. So I'm not going to speak for a minute. Well, I'm going to speak, but I'm going to fill the space with nonsense. So Fred Jones withdraws $1,000 in cash from his savings account. What immediate effect does this transaction have on the aggregate measures of M1 and M2? Now, back in the day, when M2 was including savings accounts, the mistake kids used to make all the time was they said, oh, he pulled $1,000 in cash from his savings account. Well, that means M2 went down. No, you dingo. M2 includes M1, right? So what is the M's? M1 is M0 plus checking and savings accounts. M2 is M1, which includes M0, plus money market mutual fund, small time deposits. And then M3 is M2, which includes M1. It's like them Sasha nesting dolls. So that's what it is. So do not lose sight of that. So what is the actual right answer to this? So if I take $1,000 from my savings account, what effect does it have on M1 and M2? Nothing. Now, that's not actually true. I'm lying to you. No, in this case, nothing. It used to be, the answer used to be B. The answer used to be B. Because technically savings accounts were M2 back in the day. We talked about that. And so it used to be M2 didn't change. But because savings accounts were only M2 and were not M1, M1 does increase. But that's not true anymore. So now, because they're both part of M2, your right answer is, they're both part of M1, sorry. Your right answer is E. M1's not changing because you took an M1 asset and made it another M1 asset. And since M2 always includes M1, it doesn't matter how you shuffle the M1, it's all in M2. So E would be your right answer. That's a tricky ass question. You got to be careful with a question like that. So, I'm happy to just kind of scroll through and click through some of these questions here. Will some of these end up on tomorrow's quiz? Absolutely. Which ones? I don't know. If you saw, I had about 40 to pick from. I'm very fond of the questions with the light bulbs, as everybody knows. I made that point several times. So, and on she goes. This is, which one's the monitor? You will get questions like this. If you're still here, Katie, you do get questions like this, where they'll give you a list of stuff, dollar figures like this, and say, how much is monetary base? So you ask that question. Calcing monetary base is actually a thing that shows up. And I'd say it's more recent that they do that. So they could give you something like this and say, calculate the monetary base. They absolutely could, with those same dollars. Am I likely to do a question like this? I'm not. I'm honestly not. Was this even on AP exam? No, it was not a practice exam. I'm not honestly likely to give you a function of money question. It's not a thing I really have an interest in doing. Um, Here you go. Here's that question, Kate. I told you they do it. What would that question about changing M1 M2 be taking through taking my states can ever change M3? All right, Abby, good question. So here's the answer to your question in terms of what matters for tomorrow, and you're a kind of practical human being, so I think this is what you're really asking. M3 does not appear on the AP exam at all. M3 is not even tracked by the Federal Reserve. So M3 is, for all intents and purposes, a dead stat that nobody cares about. To answer your question, you would have to actually change an asset in M3 to change M3 at all. That's why it's pointless. So much is in M3 that why even track it? It's like the last nesting doll. What's in the last nesting doll? Every nesting doll. Like, okay, great. You have to like deface that nesting doll to have any effect on the whole system. So that's why we don't even track it. But I think the real question you're asking is, do I need to know about M3? You do not. M3 and M0 do not appear on the AP exam. They don't. And M3 doesn't exist anymore. No one cares. But this is a good question. No, I'm not going to give you the answer, but because I might very well use it. But this is exactly the kind of question they'll ask about monetary base, like how to calculate it. And you know me, love them light bulbs. All right, so I showed you a handful. Who's talking to me? Hello? Oh. That's nobody. All right. Anybody else? By the way, 3 All-Star questions at the end there. Good questions to make me stay around. Scored another like 10 minutes out of me there. Getting good value for dollar out of tonight. All right, I'm going to do a mental 30 count. If I don't get anything in 30 seconds, I'm going to sign off. I really want to have more tea. This stuff is so good. All right, feels like 30 seconds of silence to me. So I'm going to call it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope it was helpful. I guess we'll find out if it was helpful tomorrow, right? But listen, I'll be honest with you. I don't really believe in surprises. I never have. I'd rather you say, all right, here's what you have to do, and you can do it. I don't care. As long as you can do it during game time, you can do it. So, use the tools available to you. We've looked at questions today. Some of them could very well end up in the AP exam. Do you think I have the kind of memory, or what's the word? Do I have the kind of selective memory to actually remember what I showed you tonight? No, I have no clue. The moment I shut this computer off, I'm not going to remember a thing I taught you. Like, did I talk about that last night? Okay, cool. Because I don't plan anything. I just make it up as I go. So, if I use a question that you guys all saw, and that's to your benefit, well, bravo for the extra work, I guess. All right, I'm done. Have a good night. I'll catch you all tomorrow. And peace.